everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. Another installment of the Plague Diaries. That was the editors with Munich. According to their Wikipedia page, that record came out in 2005. Damn, that seems like a fucking lifetime ago, man. Yeah, that was an interesting time. There was Interpol, and I feel like the major label world was signing a bunch of bands like this. These kind of Joy Division, post-punk, worshipping, bands that can be sold to regular people out in the suburbs, And the editors were one of those bands that I thought were pretty good. I found out about them. So, it must have been 2005, 2006. There was a studio in Brooklyn in the neighborhood known as Dumbo, directly under the Manhattan and Brooklyn Bridge. So that Brooklyn Bridge overpass. Sorry, that's the O in Dumbo. I was doing a session at this studio with Hot Cross, and the neighborhood's a lot different now than it was back then. I experienced the very distinct eras of Dumbo. Like back in the late 90s, it was this desolate no man's land run by gangs, and there was crime, and they were finding dead bodies, things like that. People getting killed in the streets, the mob dumping dead bodies. They would find people with no fingers and, their teeth knocked out, real noir, New York noir type stuff, Then slowly, as gentrification started creeping into Brooklyn, there was this kind of sweet spot when it was still pretty sketchy at night, but then there was all these artists living in these loft buildings. And then it turned into more gentrification, and now there's a WeWorks facility there. There's a Starbucks, I believe. There's all these, kind of professional type people living in that neighborhood. I guess there was the train station. Is that York Street? Yeah. The York Street F train stops in that neighborhood. And so you can get into the city. It's like the last stop in Brooklyn before you go into Manhattan. So real good if you work in the city to live there. So everyone has these overpriced, shitty apartments that they live in. And briefly, I was installing closets last year for a few months. And I remember I had a couple of jobs in that area. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, man, look at the people that live here now. Totally different. Back in the day, it was a way different scenario. Actually, that train station, the York Street train station, I remember real sketchy because there was one way in, and you went on this long platform, but there was no exit on the other side of the platform. So, someone could be waiting for you as you walked all the way down the platform, and there was nowhere for you to go. So I would oftentimes wonder how many people got murdered or robbed or raped or whatever down there. And I don't think the people that live there now think about those things for some reason. But anyway, there was the studio working on with Hot Cross, and right across the street from the studio was this organic juice place. And I went in there. I wanted to get a smoothie. And this really, really good looking lady was working behind the counter. And this song, Munich, was playing. And I was like, hey, I was single at the time. I'm like, who is this? And she's like, oh, it's the editors. And I'm like, did you pick this song? Did you put this on? And she's like, yeah, it's a great record. And that was it. Didn't go anywhere after that. But I do remember going into the the juice bar pretty much every day. And I only saw her maybe one or two times. One time I actually was in the van. I was sitting in the van. And I was kind of, this sounds really creepy, but wanted to see if she was working because I was thinking about going in there and talking to her. But then she came out and she met some dude, and I don't know if she saw me or not, like sitting in the van, kind of eyeing the juice bar. But after that, I figured, better let it go. Yeah, the things that pop into your mind, man, when you spend all this time alone, isolated from everybody. I just wrapped up doing an episode of Metal Matters with Randy, and we were talking about a bunch of music, and it was a cool episode because it wasn't really about anything in particular. It was about just bands that people should check out. And he mentioned the Casper Brosman Massacre, and specifically Engine Kid, Casper Brosman, and this band Otis that I used to play in back in the 90s. And that's when Randy and I actually first met, according to him. A lot of people have no idea about that band at all, outside of a few, older types that were in Boston in the early 90s. And, musically, not my favorite thing that we did. It was the first band I actually did something with musically. Like there's the first band I put a record out with, the first band I toured with, the first time I went to Europe, the first like legit rock style tour experience was in that band, opening for people, supporting larger acts. But the music and the experience of the band was just like, I feel like everyone in the band wanted to do something different. It was weird. It was, the singer, very talented guy, very much kind of up his own ass when it comes to certain things. And he was hoping, I think, to capitalize on the explosion of Nirvana and Alice in Chains and this stuff, and become like this, rock star, like heartthrob kind of guy. But for me personally, I just wanted to kick out the jams and make music and be brutal and do stuff that I was into. And then there was a conflict, and we ended up going our separate ways, and met a lot of cool people doing the band that allowed me to continue playing in bands. I formed Anodyne shortly after that. But actually the thing that I've been thinking about the most, and one of the coolest experiences I had, well, there's two really cool things that band did. And one of them was tour Europe with Fetus and Bark Market. And the other one is open for the Ramones for I think it was like 4 dates, and or 3 dates maybe. I have to check my my journals to see how exactly this thing went down. But it was the 90s, and major labels were signing all these bands that normally had, they were just in this frenzy of like trying to find a band that would break big and become like, the next Nirvana or whatever. So we did not get signed to a major label, but, some lawyer guy started poking his head into our business. And the label that we were on at the time, Cherry Disc, had aspirations to being a big player in the music world because they had put out the first Letters to Cleo record. And Letters to Cleo had a massive hit. I think their song was on the show Beverly Hills 90210. And the label had gotten a bit of money, and Letters to Cleo moved on to have a career as a major label recording artist and all the fame and videos and all that kind of stuff. That, it's not my cup of tea, but good for them. It's not really the kind of music I would listen to, but, it's good pop music, you know what I mean? So there was like business being conducted at the label. Other bands that were on Cherry Disc was Tree, who, it's funny. I've always had a lot of respect for those guys, even though their music isn't really something I listen to. But I remember that band being a band that worked so fucking hard, and I looked up to that, and They were always touring. They were like road dogs. Like they would be going on tour for like months at a time. And I guess in a way they inspired me to think about this thing as a viable way of living a life. It's like, and I developed this whole thing of like, well, if I'm on the road all the time and I can't have a job, I can't hold a job down because I'm on the road all the time, then I guess I'm a professional musician. If the money I'm making is coming from playing gigs, then that makes me a pro. So that was the birth of that mentality, was in this band. And a lot of that had to do with Tree. And as far as I know, they might still be a band to this day. Because I remember reading something, this is like probably about 10 years ago. I saw an interview with Dave, the singer. And they were talking about going on tour. They were talking about doing a tour with like the ex-cops or something like that. And he was even saying then, he's like, I just feel fortunate that we still can do this. We're still able to go out and play and do shows and go on the road and, once a year or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's like the lifer mentality. That's like, a good mindset to have. And, but yeah, their music's cool. It's not, to each his own, you know what I mean? But you have to give respect where respect is due. They had a fan base in New England. They made music that people liked. They enjoyed what they were doing. They played hard, and I wouldn't say that they were like virtuosos of playing their instruments, but they made it happen, and it's like you can't fuck with that. So they were on the label. Toe Tag was on the label. Trying to think of who else. Letters to Cleo had that one record. There was this band called Jocko Bono, who were definitely not my cup of tea, but one guy in that band ended up going on to playing Weezer, of all bands. And yeah, and then there was another band that was called Quintain Americana that, they were pretty cool. Like kind of like a band that was heavily borrowing from bands like the Jesus Lizard and that sort of thing. But, everyone was doing their thing, and as a result of everyone doing their thing, and, we were working hard and all this stuff. And this lawyer guy shows up, and he was like, yeah, let me, I want to shop you guys to a major label and blah, 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 and this and that. Actually, I think the person that introduced me to him was this booking agent. And I'm getting around to the Ramones. Don't worry. It's just a roundabout way again to that part of the story. But we had gotten a booking agent called Premier Booking. And I don't even remember how they even found us. But once again, I have to look at my journals. Maybe this is like the next storytelling thing I do, is where I actually tell you the real facts. But Premier was an old school, like New York based booking agent. They booked like Led Zeppelin. They, in the 70s, they were like that kind of thing. They were like a real deal, like old OG in the booking game. I can't remember this lady's name, man, but it was this lady who found us. I think maybe she lived in Boston at one point, but now she lives in New York. And she was like, yeah, I'm interested in working with the band. I think you guys potentially, can do something, can do some real business, And she was the one who introduced me to this guy, the attorney, who I don't know if he actually ever did anything for us, but he allegedly was going to shop us to a major label. And the only cool thing that Premier did was get us these dates with the Ramones. That was like the first thing that's the first thing that they did. And I was like, oh man, this is like, this is pretty damn good. I never did anything like that before. The Ramones. That was the first punk rock band I've ever heard. The first punk rock music in my life was the Ramones. So how cool is it that we're doing these like dates with them, like a quote unquote tour, albeit a very short one, but we were going on tour with the Ramones. And yeah, I mean, I know these days in like 2020, people might be like, oh, you know, the Ramones, whatever. You know, like the Ramones were the godfathers of this whole thing, man. You know, all these fucking bands in England wouldn't exist without the Ramones, or the New York Dolls, or Johnny Thunders, or the Stooges. So let's get that straight, okay? So for me, being out there with the Ramones was like someone offering us to do dates with like the Stooges or something like that. It was the same. You know, you got to remember this is the 90s. You know, there's less years. You know, those guys are all alive, obviously. And, you know, they maybe weren't. It was before like a Hot Topic version of life ensued. So I was like ecstatic. So we did these dates with the Ramones. You know, and I remember when I was a young lad finding out about this kind of thing. That was literally the first thing that I heard that was called punk rock. There was this kid, Mike Katz, that he's a couple of years older than me. Incredible drummer, especially back then when I had barely any idea how to play guitar. He was somebody that I was like, man, this dude's like really like the coolest guy in school, you know. He was like, you know, this tall, thin, good-looking guy with like long hair and leather jacket, you know. One summer, he went to California, and he came back to Carmel, New York, where we all grew up, and he was a punk. He changed from being a metal guy into being a punker. And the long hair, we cut it. He's got a short haircut. You know, had a Ramones Road to Ruin album cover painted on his jacket. And he came back with this compilation called Let Them Eat Jelly Beans, which had Black Flag and the Feeders. DOA was on that. It was like a seminal record. And then that was my introduction into the world of punk rock and hardcore music. And that was definitely a game changer. But yeah, Mike was doing gigs. He was in a band. Like, you know, he was like doing all kinds of shit that I only dreamed about doing. And, you know, he had this band. They were playing gigs at bars. You know, he was like 17 or whatever. And, you know, playing somehow, you know, this is back in the 80s, man. Like shit was like crazy back then. I think the drinking age was 18, you know, and that was, there's a documentary about Twisted Sister where they kind of talk about the clubs in that era where 18 was drinking age. There was a huge scene of bands playing covers. You know, and Twisted Sister came out of that world, you know, doing like Bowie covers and AC/DC and Priest and all this stuff. And then, oh yeah, every now and then they would sprinkle in like an original song. And that's kind of, I guess, how things were done in the United States around that time. So, you know, Mike, I associated him with all things cool. Like, you know, he had a band. He was a great drummer. He was like this really cool looking guy. He was into like the best, coolest music, you know, and he was someone that if you wanted to find out what you should be doing musically, you would look to what he was doing and then model that yourself after that. So he was into the Ramones. So I'm into the Ramones, you know, fuck, you know, it's, how could I not be, you know? And I remember that was, you know, the beginning of that whole thing. And I was, you know, Sheena's a punk rocker. The KKK took my baby away. You know, Blitzkrieg Bop, you know, all those classics, Rockaway Beach, you know, all that kind of shit. And then almost pretty much like a decade later, I'm out on the road with these guys. And it was a little surreal, man. Like I was definitely starstruck. You know, we, up until then, you know, I never played in some big fucking venue. There was like, you know, the venues were like 1,000 capacity, you know, which to me is a lot of people. And, you know, up until then, I'd played at places like the Rathskeller in Boston, you know, Bunratty's, you know, which I guess might have been called Local 186 at that time. Small stages, you know, you show up, you load your gear on stage, you do your thing, and you know, like that kind of trip, you know. And we had actually toured prior to that, but we'd actually done a couple of DIY style tours, playing in basements and, stuff like that, playing these like hole in the walls basically. But now it's like the real world. You're in this like legit club with a real sound system and sound engineers and like sound guys and merchandise people and techs, and no one gives a fuck about you because you're just like some unknown band that you're like you're getting paid the change basically, like I think we were guaranteed like I think $150 to do those gigs, which, honestly for us at that era, I think I was excited in that band when we were given $50 to play a show. That to me was like, oh man, look at all, $50. We got paid for pros now, man. So to do 150, that was like a whole other world. That was a whole level up from making $50 a night. And staying in a hotel, that never even crossed my mind. That was never something we ever considered doing. So, oh yeah, we can make it on this. We can make it happen, man. 150, 150. There's 4 of us in the band. We got all the money for gas. We can eat at Denny's. This is great, man. This is what the big time is like. So, yeah, it was just interesting, man. You show up. The first date, I think it was in Baltimore at Hammerjacks. I remember that because it was in a John Waters film. There's a scene in that movie with Kathleen Turner. Man, they filmed some of it in Hammerjacks, and it's like this big fucking place, and like the Ramones are doing their sound check, and I'm like, fuck, man, that's like Johnny Ramone up there playing guitar. That's Joey Ramone singing, Marky on drums, CJ, it was the era when CJ was playing in the band, and he was like the guy that was closest to our age, even though he was still probably at least 10 years older than us, but he was like the kid in the band, and the whole thing was just a trip, and I realized then, and that this is something that's always been consistent, is that at a big rock show, the headliner, they take all the time for sound check. So like they did their thing, and we got a line check and, we played, and it was like a very like eye-opening kind of world. And that was like the first big legit stage I ever played on was with the Ramones, and What's interesting too is that was like, I feel like I saw the Ramones when I was 1986 maybe. They played in Connecticut at this place called Tuxedos. I spoke with Malcolm about this from Trash American Style. He was at that show as well. It was in Tuxedos, Danbury, Connecticut, and the room was like probably fill that place like 100 people. And then, so I mean, the Ramones went through they had their ups and downs, man, and that I guess was during a period when they were in their down maybe, but so they were cool. Hung out mostly with CJ. Those guys would do sound check and then they would just disappear and they would go away to probably their hotel. And then they came back and did the set. And then like the backstage world was like, okay, you guys got this corner over here and you can hang out there if you want. Here's a bag of chips. Oh yeah, by the way, we didn't have any hospitality either. We didn't know what a rider was, so we never put one together. So we basically just got water at night. And they might have given like, a 6-pack of beer or something like that and cooler, But yeah, there was no no snacks, no meal. There was nothing. It was just fucking show up. Here's your, play, which I thought was like, especially looking back, working with like some agency like Premier Talent. They probably should have directed us to do something, knowing that we were these like fucking greenhorns, and that would have been the first thing that would have made that a little bit easier. But we were just excited to be out there doing it, man. The hardest part though was definitely the shows we were used to playing. You know, the guy who did the show would also maybe offer you a place to stay, or you know, you would play with bands that, you know, would be like, hey, or you guys need a place to stay? You can stay in my living room or whatever. You know, that was not the case with the Ramones. Like, they weren't, the promoter who put that show on was not going to let us stay at his house. That's for sure. So we ended up just sleeping in the van, you know, every night. And that was fine too, man. Like, I didn't give a fuck back then. I was young. I was a kid, you know. The whole thing was just an adventure anyway. Yeah, we did. I think it was Richmond. We finally did stay at someone's house. And it was this young lady that I think our drummer had spoken to her, and she offered to put us up for the night. So she was very nice to us. And I remember seeing her multiple times during the life of that band, you know, when we would roll through either Richmond or DC or something like that. So yeah, anyway, it was pretty tripped out. One of the dates on that tour was in Norfolk, Virginia. And in that particular show, the backstage, it must have been like something that was like formerly like a military base or something like that, because it looked like a gigantic airplane hangar that we played in. And so the backstage was like, it was like the stage, and then there was the backstage, and there was like no separate rooms or anything. There was just like one, you know, big area. So the Ramones couldn't escape us there. And I remember the tour manager, you know, they had this gigantic spread of food, and he came over to us and he was like, oh, guys, you know, I know you guys are roughing it out here. It's like, you know, we're just going to throw all this food out. So if you guys want to eat it, go ahead. So they had all this like insane like catering there. So we just tore it up, made sandwiches, like, you know, took stuff with us, like bread, you know, everything we could take that we were able to take with us. I took, you know, waters, like all that stuff, you know. And, but that most importantly was when I actually met Joey Ramone and spoke with him, and it was cool. And he was cool, and he wasn't anything like I thought he would be. You know, I mean, you know, part of it is like he's playing a persona. You know, he's supposed to be this like really weird guy, but he was a really cool guy, man. And of course, I was able to get a photograph with him, and that's a photo that I treasure it, man, because he's no longer with us. Is what, you know, Johnny Ramone's no longer with us. You know, Marky is still hanging in there, and he was the other guy I spoke to too, because he actually would watch the bands play, and he would afterward he was like, yeah, you know, you guys do a good job, you know, and it's like, and that meant a lot to me, you know. I mean, it's fucking Marky Ramone, you know. You know, who am I to like disagree with him? The New York date, I spoke with Johnny, and I always liked Johnny Ramone, man, because he looked like he had this real intense energy on stage, you know, and yeah, it just we didn't really have a conversation. It was more like he just spoke and like talked kind of at me, you know, and it was, I think he was trying to get the fuck out of there too, honestly, but. You know, I was just like, oh, yeah, hey, man, you know, well, whatever. He probably had no idea who I was either. He probably thought I was like, I worked there or something, you know. I mean, I would be surprised if he knew I was in the band that was opening for them, honestly. Sometimes that happens, man. I've heard stories of people that I know that are in well-known bands that have opened for even bigger well-known bands, and the bigger band has no idea who these people are that are on these gigs with them. You know, I'm leaving the names out, but if I told you these names, you would know who I'm talking about, but I'm leaving that out. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But one of the interesting things that Johnny told me was there's that Motorhead record, Orgasmatron, and there's a song on there called Ramones, and it's Motorhead doing a Ramones style song. So I asked Johnny about that. I was like, hey, I love Motorhead. The Ramones and Motorhead to me are like a classic bill. And Motorhead has that song, Ramones. And Johnny told me that they've only ever played one time in their entire career at that point. And that blew me away. I couldn't believe that. And so yeah, I don't know. I figured that would be something you'd be able to see a lot of, is the Ramones and Motorhead playing together. But yeah, memories, man. Right now it seems like that's all we got to work with, is like the landscape that your mind creates. Things are a little bit better down here. I've been training Muay Thai. I took my third COVID-19 test, came back negative. The gym is open as of last week to limited capacity. I did not go to the regular classes, but I did my private. And tomorrow, I believe that I'm going to go and try it out. I'm going to go and see what it's like. And if I feel safe, and, I'm going to continue with it and start hammering it out every day, just like I normally do. I rescheduled my exam that would be next month on the 21st. And then some of my coworkers were questioning me. They were like, "Oh, that's still happening?" I'm like, as far as I know. So I went and I looked on the site, and the testing center is open. The date's booked. You have to wear a mask, and they have all these like cover your ass notes on there about, if you've tested positive within the last 14 days, blah blah blah. If you have, but I find it hard to believe that somebody's there checking anything. So, what could they do really? They're gonna, how could they really verify that? So I didn't have a lot of confidence in those types of notes. It seems like, oh, well, we have to put this on here so we don't get sued. So, we left it on you. Hey, So I thought about it, and I thought that my office is not open. My office is 2 blocks away from this testing facility. Essentially, it's an office type of environment where I'll be sitting at a desk for 8 hours wearing a mask, breathing recirculated air, because an HVAC system is only 20% outside air, and 80% of it is recirculated back through the unit. So, if you're in a room, if someone's, infected, I imagine that you have a higher likelihood of you also being infected, because I do not have an N95 mask. I just have this cloth mask. So I slept on it, and I thought about what would be the most diligent thing to do for my own personal safety. And, I've been fortunate enough to stay healthy through all this. And I decided that I'm going to reschedule. There is nothing more that I want is to just take this fucking thing and get it over with, for better or for worse. So I found a new date, December 5th, December 5. That's the next date that I can do this. And hopefully, at least in New York area, the metro area, things will hopefully be improving. Maybe things will be better by then. I don't know. The rest of the country, I know, is on fire still, but we're still trending in a positive direction here. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. Maybe there's going to be a second wave in September and everything's going to be shut down again, and I never take this fucking thing. Who knows? But I'm just going with what I have right now. So yeah, that's about all that's going on these days. Probably going to get tested again. After I train, in my limited capacity, I want to see if I'm cool. At some point, I want to see my parents, who I haven't seen since February. And before I do that, I want to make sure that I'm safe. Anyway, that's enough for today. I hope everyone's doing well. And, thanks for listening. And if you like horror movies, you can check out Necromaniacs on all streaming services. It's a weekly show I do with Mike Scandato. And also, we have a new co-host, Jeff Kashid, who used to be in ISIS and Palms, has joined us as our third co-host. And of course, there's the Gimme Metal weekly show, Metal Matters, which is a variable smorgasbord of things. We got guests, we got shows that me and Randy Larson do. We got Jay Bennett also comes on every now and then, and we talk about records and this and that. And so it's a lot of fun. So if you like music, specifically heavy metal music, you can check out Metal Matters. It's everywhere. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, you name it. Anyway, I hope everyone's good. And this is Easy Action with Friends of Rock and Roll.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Friends of Rock and Roll.